How about those hand-crank windows and rotary phones? The 1970s brought us gadgets that felt essential, didn't they? Technology marched on, leaving many behind. Let's take a nostalgic look back at some everyday items from that era, the ones that were once so necessary, but have now faded into memory. Come reminisce with us. Jukeboxes. Oh, the jukebox. That glowing, musical centerpiece that practically beckoned you over for a good time. In the 70s, forget your playlists on your phone. These magnificent machines were king in diners, bars, and hangouts everywhere. Picture walking into your favorite local spot on a warm evening. Maybe the smell of coffee is in the air, and there sits a big, beautiful Wurlitzer, maybe like the Zodiac 3500, lit up like a Christmas tree and blasting out something groovy like the Bee Gees' Stay Alive. It just set the mood, you know? For just a dime or a quarter, you could be the DJ picking out the hits. Companies like Seabug and Wurlitzer were legends, turning ordinary places into lively spots where folks gathered around the music. The 70s even saw jukeboxes get fancier, with stereo sound becoming standard, those great little 45 RPM records spinning inside, and systems that let you queue up several songs so you didn't have to fight over the next pick. These machines were great. They gave customers the tunes they wanted and brought in a little extra cash for the owners. But then came cassette tapes, and after that CDs, and slowly, the bright lights of the jukebox began to dim. So, spill the beans, what song would you have picked back then? Drop a comment below, and let's share some musical memories. The Rolodex. The Rolodex. Before computers kept track of everyone we knew, this clever rotating file was the command center for contacts. It sat right there on the desk, a neat, spinning collection of cards holding your entire professional world. Can you picture it? No smartphone, no cloud, just this nifty gadget. Each card was a little gateway to a customer, a colleague, a supplier. You could say it was your personal social network, right there at your fingertips. And believe me, in the 1970s, keeping that Rolodex updated was serious business. Didn't matter if you were a top executive, a secretary juggling calls, or even a traveling salesman, that spinning file was crucial. Need to call a client to close a deal? Spin the Rolodex. Set up a lunch meeting? Spin the Rolodex. Trying to remember the name of that person you met last year? Spin the Rolodex. They came in different sizes, from little ones for a small office to huge ones that looked like they held the phone numbers for a whole city. And that sound, that satisfying click-clack as you flipped through the cards looking for a name, that was the sound of getting things done in the 70s. Sure, our phones and computers do this job now, but some folks still miss the simple, tangible feel of a good old Rolodex. Arcade tokens. Remember the jingle of those heavy metal arcade tokens in your pocket? Just holding them seemed to promise adventure. Back in the neon glow of the 1970s arcade, these weren't just coins. They were the special currency you needed to enter worlds of pixelated excitement. Forget fiddling with quarters. You'd slide a dollar bill across the counter and get back a handful or maybe even a little bag of these custom tokens. That weight felt good. Then it was off to battle aliens in Galaxian, gobble dots in Pac-Man, or climb girders in Donkey Kong. Every time you dropped a token into the slot and heard that satisfying clank, it was like starting a mini-mission. And you didn't just find these tokens in dedicated arcades. Bowling alleys often had a few games, sometimes even a local pizza place. They almost felt like little souvenirs from different spots, each one tied to memories of games won and lost. Some kids even save their favorites as Lucky Charms. It's funny how things come back around today. Those old tokens are sought after by collectors, reminding folks of a time when gaming felt a bit more tangible. Please comment 1 to let me know you'll be watching this video until the end. Camera film. Before every phone had a camera built right in, taking a picture was a whole different process, wasn't it? You had to actually load a roll of film into your camera, maybe a Kodak Instamatic or a trusty Fuji. Those little plastic canisters didn't just hold film. They held the potential for capturing memories, preserving moments from vacations, birthdays, and everyday life. In the 1970s, companies like Kodak and Fuji were household names, their brightly colored boxes promising great pictures and letting you freeze time. And who can forget the sound of advancing the film and that definite click when you push the shutter button? You always hoped you got the focus right, and nobody blinked. Then came the waiting game. Taking the roll to be developed felt like waiting for a surprise gift. Seeing your printed photos, maybe a little grainy or slightly off-center, was part of the magic. Of course, film wasn't without its headaches. Remember the frustration of the film jamming? Or that awful feeling when you open the camera back too soon and ruin the whole roll? And waiting days to get your pictures back could feel like an eternity. But there was a certain anticipation, a joy in the unexpected, that we don't quite get in today's world of instant digital images. Telex machines. Long before the World Wide Web spun its magic, before faxes flew across phone lines, and way before email became part of our daily routine, businesses had the telex. Picture this, a rather hefty, noisy machine that was the absolute peak of 70s tech for its time. It was the way companies chatted across oceans, sending written messages like something out of a science fiction story. Seriously, this was instant messaging before we even knew what digital meant. You wouldn't find any smiley faces or funny cat pictures. But if you needed to get business done internationally, the telex was your go-to. Imagine the sounds of a busy office, typewriters clacking away. Then suddenly, bing. That unique bell meant a message was coming in, maybe from halfway around the world. Out would churn that ribbon of paper tape with its little holes, carrying everything from contracts to news flashes. Knowing the telex code felt like belonging to a special club. Now, privacy wasn't exactly its strong suit. Those messages weren't much more confidential than a postcard. And goodness, the cost to send messages could really add up. So, when the digital age started bubbling up with faster, cheaper, and more secure ways to communicate, the telex, once a giant in global business, took a graceful exit, leaving behind memories of clattering keys and maybe a faint smell of ozone. Cigarette vending machines. Boy, talk about a sign of the times. Remember seeing those cigarette vending machines absolutely everywhere? Those metal boxes that would spit out a pack of smokes were as common as could be back in the 70s. It's hard to imagine now, isn't it? You'd find them humming away in the corners of smoky diners, busy bowling alleys, maybe even a laundromat down the street, ready day or night to feed a nicotine habit. Big names back then, like National Vendors and Row International, really knew how to make these machines appealing with flashy designs and logos. They placed them right where folks would walk by. And the prices. Sometimes you'd see deals like buy one, get one free. And a pack might only set you back 50 cents or $1 depending on the brand. It felt like a smoker's dream. But like bell bottoms and disco, that era couldn't last forever. Taxes on cigarettes started climbing steadily, making those machine prices less attractive. People found other ways to buy them cheaper. Then came the growing awareness about health, stricter rules about selling to minors, and suddenly, putting cigarettes in unattended machines wasn't such a great idea anymore. By the time the 20th century was winding down, these once familiar fixtures just sort of faded away, becoming another memory from a smokier past. Boomboxes. Forget those little speakers you can slip in your pocket today. Back in the 70s, if you wanted your music loud and portable, you needed a boombox. These weren't just radios. They were big, bold statements, usually rectangular, often heavy, and always ready to party. Companies like Sony and Panasonic were the kings of the boombox scene, creating legendary models like the Sony CFS 110 or the Panasonic RX 510 that folks remember fondly. Carrying one of these, often perched on your shoulder, meant you were bringing the music with you to the park, the beach, the basketball court, wherever you were hanging out. These things were built tough, and had speakers that could really blast, making sure everyone around knew what you were listening to, whether they liked it or not. Having a cool boombox was definitely a status symbol back then. Part of the look, part of the culture. What other gadgets or gizmos from the 1970s bring back a rush of nostalgia for you? Newspaper vending machines. Do you recall that satisfying clunk when you dropped your coins into a newspaper vending machine and pulled out the day's news? In the 1970s, these metal boxes were everywhere, just as common as platform shoes, standing on street corners from coast to coast. For just a dime or two, you could grab your paper, catch up on sports, politics, or maybe just read the comics. Talk about handy. No waiting for the paper boy or finding a newsstand. These machines were like little 24/7 news depots, always ready with the latest headlines. The newspapers themselves loved them, often running ads showing how simple it was to get their paper from one of these boxes. But like so many things, their time started to run out. The internet brought news right to our screens, instantly and often for free. People started clicking for news instead of unfolding a paper, and those once bustling vending machines began to look a bit neglected, like relics. Plus, let's be honest, they could be targets for troublemakers. We've all seen movies where someone tries to pry one open, right? Theft and vandalism were ongoing headaches, adding to the challenges as online news chipped away at newspaper sales. Carbon paper. Remember carbon paper? Those thin bluish or blackish sheets that seem to get ink on everything. If you grew up before photocopiers were in every office, you definitely know what I'm talking about. Back in the 1970s, carbon paper was the standard way to make a copy of something you were typing or writing. Think about filling out forms that had multiple layers. You'd slip the carbon paper in between the sheets. That tap, tap, tap sound of the typewriter keys hitting it, and even that faint, slightly chemical smell it had, that was the smell of getting work done. Invoices, receipts, letters, reports. If you needed more than one copy, you used carbon paper. It saved so much time compared to writing or typing everything out again by hand. And here's a fun fact. You know how email has a CC line? That literally stands for carbon copy, a little nod back to these inky sheets that were once essential. Sure, it could be messy, smudged fingers were common. Sometimes the paper tore, and we've all probably forgotten to put the carbon paper in at least once. But for its time, it was a simple, clever solution when making copies wasn't as easy as pushing a button. TV guide. Remember plopping down in front of the TV back in the 70s, before cable gave us hundreds of channels and way before remotes let us surf on the couch? You'd switch on that big console Zenith TV, and often you just get snow. What was even on? That's where the trusty TV guide came in. It was like a map for the television wilderness. First hitting stands back in '53, this little magazine became absolutely essential in the 70s. For maybe 15 or 25 cents, you got the whole week's TV schedule right in your hands. It wasn't just listings. You got short descriptions of the shows, the exact times they were on, and even some juicy Hollywood tidbits. It was the original spoiler alert, telling you what was coming up. Believe it or not, they sold over 20 million copies a week. At its peak, practically everyone had one lying around. Now, you might have heard whispers back then about deals between the guide and the networks, maybe shaping the content a bit, but hey, it was the Wild West of television in the 70s. Of course, times changed. Remote controls made channel flipping easier. Cable brought an explosion of choices, and then the internet just changed the game entirely. TV Guide tried to adapt, moving online, but it just never felt quite the same as holding that little magazine. Card catalogs. Remember the quiet dignity of the library? That unique smell of old paper and binding glue? Well, back in the days before Google answered our every question in seconds, the real gatekeepers of information were the card catalogs. Think about those rows upon rows of wooden drawers, each stuffed with index cards. They were the original search engines. It seems almost quaint now, doesn't it? Actually having to go somewhere, pull open drawers, and flip through physical cards just to track down a book. But that was the way, and honestly, it had its own kind of charm. Each little card, typed up so neatly with the author, title, subject, and that all-important Dewey Decimal number, was like a key unlocking a universe of knowledge. You could stumble upon unexpected treasures just by browsing. The librarians, those wonderful stewards of stories and facts, kept these catalogs running like clockwork, adding new cards and keeping everything shipshape. These weren't just pieces of furniture. They were the very heart of the library, a beautiful system of organization. Of course, computers changed everything with online catalogs you could search from anywhere. While nobody misses the occasional paper cut, there's still a fondness for the old card catalog. It reminds us of a time when finding information felt a bit more like an adventure. Punch cards. Here's a real throwback: punch cards. Those stiff pieces of cardboard covered in tiny rectangular holes might look ancient now, but for a good chunk of the 20th century, they were how computers got their instructions and data. Think about that. No screens, no keyboards as we know them, just stacks and stacks of these cards. The pattern of holes held the information. The basic idea actually came from the weaving industry way back in the 1800s, believe it or not. But it was in the 1950s and 60s that punch cards became central to the world of computing, especially at universities and big government agencies running massive mainframes. Programmers, often looking the part with pocket protectors, would meticulously punch holes into these cards using special machines. One wrong punch could mess up an entire program. For college students back then, dealing with stacks of punch cards was just part of life, sometimes a point of pride, often a source of major frustration, especially if you dropped your carefully ordered stack. The sound of those key punch machines was constant in computer labs. And the sheer volume. A complicated program might need thousands of cards, taking up boxes and boxes of space. Fax machines. Before we could attach a document to an email and hit send, the fax machine felt like pure magic. It was the device that let businesses shoot documents across the country, or even the world, using phone lines. In the 1970s, this was seriously advanced stuff. A machine that could send a copy of a paper somewhere else in just a few minutes? It was revolutionary. Companies like Sharp were leading the charge, bragging about machines that could transmit pages faster than ever, making it easier for companies far apart to work together. It really felt like it was shrinking the globe. Now, before the fax really took off, there was its older cousin, the Telex machine. That clunky thing we talked about earlier was also used for sending typed messages over wires, using special codes and that punch paper tape. The sound of its bell ringing meant business was happening. But the Telex wasn't perfect, messages weren't very secure, and it cost a pretty penny to use the dedicated lines. So, as the 70s gave way to the 80s, the fax machine, being faster, generally cheaper to operate, and easier for anyone to use, quickly became the favorite way to send documents quickly, pushing the Telex toward the history books. Punch clocks. The punch clock, that sturdy metal box, often mounted on the wall near the entrance, was a familiar sight for anyone who worked back in the 70s. It didn't matter if you wore a blue collar or a white one. Punching in and out was part of the daily rhythm. That solid chunk sound it made when you slid your time card and marked the official start and end of your workday, whether you were on an assembly line, in an office, or clocking in at the factory. Remember those cardboard time cards? Thin things, printed with grids, that would get little rectangular holes punched in them each time you used the clock. They were like your personal work diary, physical proof of the hours you put in. For the bosses, the punch clock was a huge help. It replaced handwritten logs and guesswork with automated precision. It tracked every employee's time accurately, made doing payroll much easier, and probably saved companies a lot of arguments and headaches. But just like vinyl records gave way to tapes and CDs, The trusty punch clock eventually faced retirement. Computers brought sophisticated timekeeping software, and those mechanical workhorses gradually disappeared, becoming symbols of an older way of working. Phone books. Did you know the very first phone book back in 1878 only had about 50 names and didn't even list phone numbers? Well, by the time the 1970s rolled around, the phone book had become a massive, essential fixture in every household. It was proof that you could organize a whole city's worth of people and businesses between two covers. You had the white pages for regular folks' numbers, the blue pages for government listings sometimes, and of course, the all-important yellow pages. That was a gold mine for finding local businesses, all competing with different fonts and little drawings to catch your eye. Back then, having a business name that started with A was a real advantage. You'd be listed first. And let's be honest, who didn't use the phone book for a little mischief now and then? Finding random numbers for prank calls was practically a teenage rite of passage. But the reign of the mighty phone book couldn't last forever. Once the internet came along with search engines and online directories, those thick books started to seem less necessary. They gradually vanished from doorsteps and ended up in recycling bins. Still, for those of us who remember flipping through those thin pages, maybe running a finger down a column of names, there's a certain nostalgia for the good old phone book. Payphones. Can you believe there was a time you couldn't just pull a phone out of your pocket to make a call when you were out and about? That's where payphones came in. These sturdy booths or wall-mounted phones were our lifelines when we were away from home. You'd see them on street corners, inside restaurants, at gas stations, practically everywhere. They were vital for travelers trying to check in, students calling home, or really anyone needing to connect while on the move. And who could forget the potential for jokes? That famous old comedy bit, "Bobble Hot a Baby, It's a Boy," started with a payphone call. Using one was a whole ritual. Digging for change, hearing the coins drop and jingle, listening for the dial tone, carefully dialing the number, and hoping the connection went through. Many even had those little phone books attached by a metal cord, their pages thumbed through countless times. It's wild to think that at one point, there were over 2 million payphones across the USA. That's way more than the number of Starbucks locations today. But then came cell phones, starting in the late 90s and really taking over in the early 2000s, and the era of the payphone quickly faded. Floppy disks. The floppy disk, that square plastic thing that was once the height of data storage technology. Through the 70s, and especially the 80s, if you wanted to save a computer file or move it from one machine to another, floppy disks were how you did it. It's hard for younger folks to grasp a time before USB drives or cloud storage, when internet access wasn't even common. These disks, making that satisfying click or thunk when you slid them into the drive slot, held our school reports, work projects, maybe even early computer games or digital photos. Remember the different sizes? First came the truly floppy 8-inch ones, then the 5.25-inch ones that were still bendable, and finally the rigid 3.5-inch discs that felt so much more modern and held a whopping 1.44 megabytes. You had to be careful with them, though. Keep them away from magnets, don't bend them, and hope you didn't drop one. Despite their limitations, floppy disks were absolutely essential for years, letting us share information and back up our precious digital creations. Now they seem like ancient artifacts, maybe collecting dust in a drawer somewhere, reminding us of when saving was a very physical act. 8-track tapes. How about 8-track tapes? Boy, those chunky plastic cartridges were everywhere back in the 70s. If you bought a new car, especially from Ford or GM, chances are it came with an 8-track player built right into the dashboard. It seemed like the best way to have your favorite albums on the road before cassette tapes really took off for car audio. Remember how they worked? It was one long loop of tape inside, and the player would automatically switch between 4 programs or sets of stereo tracks. You'd always get that loud, keyar chunk sound when it switched, sometimes right in the middle of your favorite guitar solo, which could be annoying. While they brought us portable music freedom, they could be finicky too, sometimes jamming or getting eaten by the player. Cassettes came along smaller, often more reliable, allowed for mixtapes, and you could easily rewind or fast forward to specific songs, so the trusty 8-track faded away pretty quickly by the early 80s. Ultra. Wow. Looking back, it's really something to see how much has changed. Those gadgets and everyday items were such a big part of life back then. And now, they're mostly just memories or collector's items. Did we forget any of your favorite things from the 1970s that are now obsolete? Please share your memories in the comments below. And if you had fun taking this trip down memory lane with us, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and maybe share it with a friend who remembers the good old days. Thanks so much for watching. 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 Answering machines. Remember coming home and seeing that little red light blinking? That insistent blink meant someone had called while you were out, leaving a message on your answering machine. Back in the 1970s, before we all had phones in our pockets that took messages, the answering machine was a revolutionary piece of tech. It was amazing. You could finally leave the house and not worry about missing an important call. No more endless games of phone tag. And those messages were recorded on actual cassette tapes. Those tapes became little slices of life, capturing voices, maybe the excitement of good news from a friend, or just a quick call me back. They held more than just words. They held the tone and feeling of the moment. And, oh, the outgoing messages people recorded. Some were plain and simple. Others were attempts at humor. And some were just plain odd, maybe with background music or sound effects. It was a little way to show your personality, even when you weren't there to pick up the phone. Eventually, voicemail built into phone systems, and then cell phones made the separate answering machine seem old-fashioned. But for those of us who lived through the era of rewinding tapes to hear a message again, that machine holds a certain charm, a symbol of a time when communication felt a bit different. Typewriters. That sound of click-clack-ding is unforgettable, isn't it? The rhythmic tapping of the keys, the satisfying whack of the type bar hitting the paper, the little bell warning you're near the end of the line, and then the solid zip of the carriage return. It was the sound of writing long before computers took over our desks. The typewriter was the essential tool for putting words on paper. From sturdy Royals to quieter models like the IBM Selectric, these machines were used by everyone: writers crafting novels, journalists filing stories, students typing essays, businesses creating documents. Remember the Scholes and Glidden typewriter from way back in 1868? That was like the original ancestor, the machine that introduced the QWERTY keyboard layout we still use today, thanks to Christopher Latham Scholes. Getting your first typewriter, maybe as a gift before heading off to college, felt like a big deal. It was an investment in your future. Many of us spent late nights pounding out papers, the sound of the keys echoing in the quiet room. Of course, switching to computers took some getting used to. Old habits died hard, like hitting the space bar twice after a period or wanting to slam that enter key. And mistakes? Oh boy, no easy backspace. You needed correction fluid or had to start the whole page over. But there was something uniquely satisfying about using a typewriter, a real physical connection to the words you were creating. Slide projectors. Remember gathering the family in a darkened living room for a slideshow? Someone would set up the screen, and out would come the slide projector, maybe that iconic Kodak carousel type. You'd hear that familiar whirring fan and the definite ka-chunk sound as each cardboard or plastic frame slide dropped into place. This was primetime entertainment in the 70s. It was how we shared our vacation photos, birthday party snaps, and holiday memories before everything went digital. Loading those circular trays was part of the whole routine. Before you could just email photos or swipe through them on a phone, Setting up the projector was the main event for showing your color pictures to friends and relatives. Now, those projectors and boxes of slides are probably tucked away in attics, completely replaced by TVs and digital devices, but there was something special about sharing those bright images together in the dark, wasn't there? The 1970s was a bold, wild decade full of groovy fashion, daring ideas, and some truly bizarre product flops. From exploding cars to edible shampoo, not everything was a hit. Curious what went hilariously wrong? Let's rewind and uncover the strangest, most unforgettable failures the 70s left behind. Sansui quadraphonic sound. Think back to the early 1970s audio scene. Most of us felt pretty advanced with our standard two-speaker stereo setups, right? Well, the folks over at Sansui thought we could do better. They envisioned sound hitting you from absolutely all angles, total immersion. So, in 1972, they dropped their quadraphonic sound system on the world. This wasn't just stereo. It was 4 distinct channels pumping audio from the front, back, left, and right. A whole different ballgame. Now, it wasn't exactly cheap. The system ran about $200 back then, which is like splashing out around $1,200 today. But it was undeniably cool, cutting-edge stuff. Other audio companies quickly jumped on the bandwagon, offering their own quad setups. Some even featured funky joysticks so you could actually steer the sound balance around your room. Big rock acts got into it too. Aerosmith, Clapton, the Eagles. They all released albums specially mixed for 4 channels. Here's the rub, though. Despite the hype and the rockstar approval, the average Joe just wasn't convinced they needed to overhaul their entire system and find space for 2 extra speakers. It felt like a big leap, maybe too complicated. Adoption never really took off, and the whole quadraphonic thing quietly faded out by '78, making way for digital sound. Still, you can find working Sansui quad receivers today for maybe $200, a neat piece of audio history. Gerber's grown-up goof. You know Gerber, the company that's practically synonymous with feeding babies? Well, back in 1974, they decided to aim a little higher, trying to capture the adult market. They launched this product called Gerber Singles. The idea? Pure convenience for young, single folks living alone who maybe didn't want the hassle of cooking after work. Sounds reasonable enough, right? Little pre-packaged meals, ready to heat and eat. But here's where things went sideways. These singles were essentially adult-sized servings of, well, baby food. Yep, the same pureed meats and mushy vegetables, served up in those iconic little glass jars. Can you imagine? Coming home, kicking off your shoes, and unscrewing a jar of beef puree for one? Or maybe some luscious blended peas. Yeah, it didn't exactly scream sophisticated adult dinner. People were confused, maybe a little grossed out. The texture was all wrong. The whole concept felt a bit odd. And let's be honest, a frozen TV dinner suddenly looked pretty good. Adults wanted actual texture, flavor, and maybe just a touch more dignity with their meals. Singles vanished from stores almost overnight. Big idea, bigger flop. The phone with a view and a price tag. Alright, let's take a little trip down memory lane, back before everyone had a video camera in their pocket. Remember Bell Telephone? Yeah, the company that eventually turned into AT&T. Well, back in the swinging 60s, they were dreaming up the future. At the 64 World's Fair, they unveiled something straight out of the Jetsons, the Model 1 picture phone. Imagine a phone where you could actually see who you were talking to. Pretty wild stuff for the time. A handful of these prototypes even saw some limited action that decade, giving folks a taste of what was to come. So, by 1970, Bell decided to take it mainstream and launched the first commercial picture phone. But here's where the dream hit a snag: the price. Get ready for this. It cost a whopping $160 a month, plus you paid by the minute. Adjusted for today's dollars, that's like shelling out over $1,200 monthly, even if you never made a call. Yikes. Plus, it was strictly a one-on-one affair. No conference calls or virtual family get-togethers. They kept trying, mind you. Rolled out a Model 2, tried pitching it to businesses in the 80s, and even released a home version, the Videophone 2000, in '92. None of them really caught on. But here's the funny part. Just a few years back, in 2019, two old Model 2s fetched over $7,500 at auction. Finally found an audience. Just 50 years too late. Go figure. Remember Laserdisc? Big, shiny, and almost there. Before we all had stacks of DVDs. Remember those enormous silver discs? That was Laserdisc, hitting the scene back in 1978. They looked like supersized CDs, and honestly, they offered a glimpse into the future. The picture quality? Definitely sharper than your average blurry VHS tape. The sound? A noticeable step up. For movie buffs, it felt pretty cutting edge for home viewing. But it wasn't quite ready for prime time for most folks. The big sticking point? You absolutely couldn't record anything on them. That was a deal breaker when taping shows off the air was half the fun of owning a VCR. Laserdiscs were strictly playback devices. Plus, the players and the discs themselves cost significantly more than the VHS gear everyone else was buying. So, while Laserdisc hung around for quite a while, becoming a favorite for serious film enthusiasts who loved the quality and early bonus features like commentary tracks, it never really took over the mainstream living room. Once the smaller, cheaper, and eventually recordable DVD format arrived, the writing was on the wall for the big, shiny discs. A cool idea, just not quite the right package for the times. That crazy swerving bike. Okay, the mid-'70s gave us some truly wild rides, remember? Let's talk about the swing bike, which rolled onto the scene around 1975. This definitely wasn't your dependable 10-speed. Invented by a guy named Ralph Belden, its unique claim to fame was having two separate steering points. You had the usual handlebars up front, naturally, but there was also a second pivot point right under the seat that let you steer the back wheel independently. Imagine that. You could literally make the front and back ends wiggle in completely different directions. This bike was pure spectacle, built strictly for showing off, pulling off crazy S-turns down the block, or maybe riding awkwardly with one wheel on the sidewalk and the other in the street. A real head-turner, but zero practicality for actually getting anywhere. The big catch? Riding it smoothly took serious coordination. That independent rear steering made it incredibly wobbly and unpredictable for anyone just learning. Let's just say it probably led to plenty of sudden, unscheduled meetings with the pavement. So while it looked radical, the sheer difficulty and high wipeout factor meant it never became a neighborhood staple. It pretty much swiveled off into obscurity by 1978. Appreciate you watching so far. Ready for more? Let us know by commenting yes below, helps us see who's still along for the ride. Clairol yogurt shampoo. Remember when natural became the big buzzword? Everything suddenly had honey, herbs, or lemons splashed across the label. The beauty aisle started looking like a health food store. Well, Clairol decided to get in on this trend, but they took a slightly dairy approach. In 1979, they unveiled Clairol yogurt shampoo. The big idea? Yogurt is good for you, so naturally, it must be great on your hair too. Okay, maybe a bit of a stretch. They really played up the food angle on the bottle. It practically screamed breakfast, not beauty product. This marketing choice backfired spectacularly. People were genuinely scratching their heads. Is this for my hair, or should I mix it with granola? The lines got so blurred, you won't believe this, but there were actual reports of folks trying to eat the stuff. Let's just say marketing a hair product like a snack food didn't quite hit the mark. Add in that the shampoo's performance wasn't exactly mind-blowing, and this yogurt dream soured fast. It disappeared quickly, becoming a funny little remember when story in beauty product history. Downy Flake toaster eggs. Remember that big push for anything you can stick in a toaster back in the early 70s? Following the craze for Pop-Tarts and frozen waffles, Downy Flake, the frozen breakfast folks, thought they had the next big thing. In 1972, they gave us toaster eggs. The concept was simple enough. A frozen, pre-cooked egg patty you could supposedly brown up right in your trusty toaster. Fast, hot breakfast, minimal fuss. Seemed logical, tapping into that demand for quick morning meals. The problem? Well, they looked less like something you'd eat and more like something you'd skip across a pond. People described them as thick, round, unappetizingly dense hockey pucks. Definitely not screaming delicious breakfast. Beyond the visual turnoff, the texture and taste just didn't deliver what people expected from an egg. Let's be honest, the whole idea of a toasted egg was already a bit weird for most folks who like theirs fried, scrambled, or boiled. Consumers basically gave them a collective, no thanks. Introduced with fanfare in '72, these breakfast oddities were yanked from freezer cases by 1975, proving that convenience alone doesn't make a meal. It still has to actually taste good and, well, look like food. Wearable TV? The story of the TV hat. In the '70s, someone had this wild idea. What if you could watch TV anywhere, totally hands-free? Enter the TV hat. Yep, it was exactly what it sounds like, a baseball cap rigged with a tiny television screen dangling right down in front of your eyes. The promise was portable entertainment, maybe watching your favorite sitcom while strolling through the park or riding the bus. Sounds futuristic, maybe? Well, the reality was less than stellar. First off, let's be honest, wearing this thing made you look pretty comical, like an extra from a B-movie sci-fi flick. And actually watching it? Imagine squinting into a minuscule, grainy screen just inches from your nose. It was a fast track to eye strain and a headache, not exactly relaxing entertainment. Plus, the picture quality was nothing like we have today, fuzzy and hard to see unless the lighting was just right. Then you had the clunky wires snaking down to a battery pack or tuner you had to carry. It was awkward, uncomfortable, and just didn't deliver. Unsurprisingly, the TV hat never caught on and vanished pretty quickly. It remains a funny little footnote, a bizarre gadget that tried to leap into the future but tripped at the starting line. Betamax, better but didn't share. Alright, remember the days before streaming, when you actually had to rent a movie? Back in 1975, Sony dropped Betamax on us, and boy, it seemed like they'd hit a home run. This was groundbreaking, one of the first ways to record TV or watch movies at home. And let me tell you, the quality was noticeably better than anything we'd seen. Sharper picture, richer sound. In fact, it was so good that professionals, like TV stations, stuck with high-end beta tapes well into the 2000s. But here's the kicker, where Sony kind of shot themselves in the foot. They had this superior technology, but they kept it locked down tight. Sony flat out refused to let other companies make players or use the Betamax format. That meant fewer machines on the shelves and, critically, fewer movies available for you to rent or buy. Then, just 1 year later, JVC waltzes in with VHS. Maybe the quality wasn't quite as stunning, but JVC had a different game plan. They shared. They licensed VHS technology to anyone who wanted it. The result? VHS exploded. Suddenly, you had more player options, more brands, and way more movie titles available. Poor Betamax went from owning the entire market in '75 to just a tiny 10% sliver by '88. It proved that sometimes, being technically the best doesn't win the race if you aren't willing to play ball with everyone else. Polaroid's flickering film dream. Back in the '70s, Polaroid absolutely owned instant photography, didn't they? Those cameras were everywhere, magically printing photos right before your eyes. Feeling unstoppable, they decided to tackle the next frontier, home movies. In 1977, they launched Polavision, their big shot at dethroning Kodak's popular Super 8 film format, which pretty much dominated everyone's family movie nights back then. The Polavision system was definitely thinking outside the box. It used these unique film cartridges that looked a bit like tiny cassettes. After filming your masterpiece, you'd slot it into a special desktop viewer, and amazingly, it would develop the movie in just a few minutes. Instant gratification, movie style. They even cleverly designed the reel so you could play it on a regular Super 8 projector if you wanted. Sounds innovative, but the reality didn't quite match the hype. The biggest problem? The picture just wasn't very good. You needed incredibly bright light, Otherwise, everything looked muddy and dim. Colors lacked punch. And perhaps the fatal flaw? Absolutely no sound recording capability. That was huge, especially when Super 8 cameras could capture those precious family moments with audio. People just weren't buying it, literally. Sales fizzled, and Polaroid pulled the plug just 2 years later, in 1979. It's now a footnote, easily found dirt cheap online. A reminder that even giants can stumble when they misread what people really want. Okay, be honest, did any of you actually use, or at least see, one of these 1970s product duds back in the day? Twist and tone. Twist away the inches? Not quite. The 70s, an era practically overflowing with questionable fitness trends. One real gem, if you can call it that, was the twist and tone. Remember those plastic discs? This little gadget promised a revolution. Get a slimmer waistline and maybe even lose weight, all without the unpleasantness of actual, strenuous exercise. Forget jogging or sweating it out. The sales pitch was pure, blissful convenience. You simply stood on this spinning plastic circle seriously. It looked just like a big lazy Susan countertop tray, planted your feet firmly, and twisted your upper body side to side. Easy peasy. You could supposedly do it anywhere while watching your favorite shows, maybe even during commercial breaks. The ads pitched it as a miracle cure for anyone who dreaded breaking a sweat. But let's be real, it was mostly wishful thinking. While you were moving, it wasn't exactly a calorie-torching workout. It certainly couldn't replace getting your heart rate up or building real strength. Plus, let's face it, standing there swiveling your hips felt pretty darn goofy after a while. These twisters had variations floating around since the 60s, but none ever truly became a fitness staple for a very good reason. Sauna hot pants. Alright, let's talk about some truly bizarre 70s inventions, because there were plenty. You remember hot pants being everywhere, right? Well, someone decided to combine that trend with the endless quest for easy weight loss. Introducing sauna hot pants. The concept was wild. Inflatable, puffy shorts you'd wear around the house. The promise? Pure magic. Just put them on, kick back on your lazy boy, maybe even grab some snacks, and supposedly, the trapped heat would make you sweat off inches from your hips, thighs, and belly. No diet, no exercise required. Just sit there and shrink. It sounded amazing, didn't it? The theory was that intense sweating in those problem areas would just melt the fat away. Several companies even jumped on this bandwagon, pumping out their own versions of these inflatable miracle workers. Of course, the reality was less miraculous. People quickly discovered that sweating profusely doesn't actually equal fat loss, just water loss. And lounging around in what amounted to blow-up plastic shorts was incredibly uncomfortable and, frankly, looked ridiculous. Plus, for the gentleman wearing them, there might have been a little anxiety about exactly what might be shrinking due to all that trapped heat. These sauna shorts deflated from the market pretty quickly, becoming a hilarious example in the long line of too-good-to-be-true weight loss gadgets. The Pet Rock. Let's talk about one of the absolute head-scratchers from the good old days, specifically 1975. Remember the Pet Rock? Yeah, you heard me right. Not some fancy toy, just a smooth, unassuming stone plopped into a cardboard box. This wasn't just any box, mind you. It had little air holes punched in it, like for a real critter, and came with this hilarious care and training manual. The whole gag was that it was the perfect pet. No feeding, no walks, zero mess. And believe it or not, for a hot minute there, America went absolutely nuts for it. The brain behind this bizarre brilliance was an advertising executive named Gary Dahl. Legend has it he was tired of hearing friends complain about their pets, and voila, he turned a virtually worthless rock into a $4 sensation. It was pure marketing genius tapping into that desire for something simple, something funny. Millions flew off the shelves, mostly as gag gifts or conversation starters. It was just so delightfully absurd. But, like flared pants sometimes do, the novelty wore thin pretty darn quick. By early 76, the joke got old. People looked at their pet rock sitting there and thought, Okay, it's a rock. The craze evaporated almost overnight, leaving stores scrambling to get rid of leftover inventory. While Gary Dahl laughed all the way to the bank, the pet rock cemented its place in history as the ultimate symbol of a flash-in-the-pan fad, a perfect, quirky snapshot of 1970s culture that was here today and truly gone tomorrow. Cube, TV's early interactive gamble. Alright, let's take a little trip back to 1977. Remember when watching TV was just watching? Well, Warner Cable had this ambitious, maybe even audacious, idea called Cube. Forget just passively flipping channels. They envisioned a future where you interacted with your television. Picture this. Using a special keypad, you could actually vote in real-time polls during a show, maybe influence how a story developed, or even pick the next music video they played. Sounds a lot like what we do online now, right? But this was way back then, a genuine crystal ball glimpse into interactive entertainment. Of course, being so far ahead of the curve had its downsides. The technology, while impressive for the era, was expensive to install in homes and, let's be honest, pretty darn clunky. It wasn't always reliable, and many families found it overly complicated when they just wanted to unwind after dinner. Cube rolled out in a few test markets, and while it definitely turned some heads, it never really caught fire with the mainstream audience. People just weren't sure they needed it. By the early 80s, the dream fizzled out. Maintaining the complex system cost too much, and without widespread adoption, Cube quietly faded away. Still, you've got to tip your hat to them. It was a bold swing, one of the very first attempts to make TV a two-way street, even if it ultimately proved to be an idea whose time just hadn't quite come yet. Do you think any of these failed products were ahead of their time? Why or why not? When the World Football League tackled the NFL and fumbled, think back to 1974. While the NFL reigned supreme, a brash newcomer burst onto the scene, the World Football League. The WFL had huge aspirations, talking about international teams and directly challenging the established football giant. They kicked off with 13 teams across America, including one clear out in Honolulu, maybe stretching the definition of world just a bit, as they never left U.S. soil. They even managed to tempt some notable NFL players over with the promise of fat contracts, a real gamble for those guys, leaving the stability of the NFL. But the initial buzz and flashy start quickly sputtered out. Stadiums often looked sparse, the league's finances went into a nosedive, and crucially, paychecks became unreliable, even for those lured star players. Can you imagine? It turned into a financial nightmare behind the scenes. After barely limping through its inaugural 1974 season, the league simply couldn't sustain the losses. It collapsed spectacularly midway through the 1975 season, proving that taking on the NFL required way more than just ambition and a hopeful name. Gone almost as fast as it arrived. Bricklin SV1. Remember the Bricklin SV1? Maybe? Launched with serious fanfare in 1974, the SV1, that stood for Safety Vehicle 1, was supposed to be the future of safe and sporty driving. It definitely looked the part, didn't it? With those dramatic gull-wing doors, it screamed futuristic cool right there in the mid-70s. The brainchild of Malcolm Bricklin, the idea was noble: build a car focused on crash protection, featuring an integrated roll cage and bumpers designed to absorb impacts. But, like many ambitious dreams of the era, reality hit hard. Despite packing a V8 engine, the car was incredibly heavy due to all that safety reinforcement, making it disappointingly slow. Build quality was a constant headache. The acrylic body panels tended to crack, and those signature gull-wing doors? Well, they weren't always reliable, sometimes trapping occupants inside. Production nightmares and soaring costs plagued the Canadian factory, and after producing fewer than 3,000 cars, the company went belly up in late 1975. A bold vision for safety, ultimately undone by practical failures. Smell-o-vision revivals, when movies tried to smell. Here's a real head-scratcher from the annals of movie history, smell-o-vision. The original nutty idea popped up back in the 60s, but the 70s saw some earnest attempts to actually make it happen. The dream? To go beyond just seeing and hearing a movie, they wanted you to smell it too. Imagine watching a scene in a bakery and actually smelling fresh bread, or getting a whiff of salty air during a seaside sequence. Totally immersive, right? Well, the reality was a bit stinkier. The technology was incredibly primitive and unreliable. Sometimes the scent would puff out way too early, sometimes way too late, and sometimes not at all. Even worse was the lingering effect. Once a smell was released, say, exhaust fumes during a car chase, it tended to hang around. So you might be trying to focus on a tender romantic moment while the theater still reeked of gasoline, and maybe that chili dog from 3 scenes back. It was more distracting and confusing than captivating. Audiences weren't impressed, and theater owners definitely weren't eager to install expensive, glitchy scent machines. So, the 70s revival of smell-o-vision faded fast, proving that maybe some senses are best left out of the multiplex. The Ford Pinto's fiery secret. Launched back in '71, right when gas prices were making everyone sweat, the Pinto seemed like a smart buy. It was compact, didn't cost an arm and a leg, and barely sipped gasoline. Just what America needed during that oil crisis, right? Well, behind that sensible image lurked a genuinely terrifying problem. Ford placed the gas tank in a really bad spot at the very rear, almost asking for trouble. Get tapped from behind, even in a relatively minor collision, and that tank had a nasty habit of rupturing and potentially erupting in flames. The truly shocking part? Ford was apparently aware of this horrifying risk. Internal documents later surfaced showing they'd actually crunched the numbers. The cold calculation? Paying off lawsuits for injuries and even fatalities would likely cost less than spending the extra bucks per car to fix the dangerous design. Once that bombshell dropped, the public backlash was understandably massive. The Pinto quickly became infamous, a textbook example of corporate negligence putting dollars way ahead of driver safety. It was a huge PR nightmare for Ford and remains one of the most notorious automotive blunders of the decade. Clackers, that loud toy that bit back. Remember those things called clackers? Oh man, every kid on the block seemed to have a set for a while there. Just two hard, heavy acrylic balls hanging on a string, right? The whole point was to get them swinging, up and down, clack, 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 making that satisfyingly loud noise as they slammed together above and below your knuckles. They were flashy, strangely addictive, and tougher to master than they looked, which only added to the challenge. But here's the kicker. Those seemingly simple balls weren't exactly indestructible. If you really got him going, or maybe caught him at a weird angle, bam, they could shatter like cheap glass, sending razor-sharp bits of plastic absolutely flying. Suddenly, the playground fun wasn't so fun anymore. We started hearing about cuts, chipped teeth, and some pretty scary eye injuries. This little fad quickly turned into a genuine safety hazard. It wasn't long before Uncle Sam stepped in, around the mid-70s, and flat out banned them. Parents breathed a collective sigh of relief, and just like that, the noisy clacker craze went silent. The rolling fishbowl, remembering the AMC Pacer. Okay, flashback to 1975. Remember when the AMC Pacer rolled onto the scene? You couldn't miss it. That car looked like absolutely nothing else out there. It was all huge, rounded glass, and this super wide, almost bubble-shaped body. AMC was going for something revolutionary. A small car that felt surprisingly spacious inside, like a compact with big car room. Folks quickly nicknamed it the fishbowl on wheels, and honestly, it fit. But that unique design brought its own set of headaches. For a supposedly compact car, the Pacer was surprisingly heavy. That meant it felt kind of sluggish on the road, and, worse, it wasn't exactly a gas sipper. Terrible timing during the 70s fuel crunch. And that look? You either thought it was cool and futuristic, or just plain odd. There wasn't much middle ground. Sure, it was roomy inside, and it definitely earned some dedicated fans over the years, especially after popping up in Wayne's World. But the cool factor and cult status couldn't overcome the sluggish performance and polarizing style for most buyers. Sales fizzled, and by 1980, the Pacer was history. It remains a fascinating, quirky attempt at innovation, a bold swing that just didn't quite connect. 8-track tape cleaning kits. Keeping those 8 tracks ticking? Okay, picture this. It's the 1970s, and you've got your favorite 8-track jammed into the player, maybe in that sweet muscle car or your living room console. Those big old tapes were the sound of the era. But with all that clicking and clunking, companies smelled an opportunity. Enter the 8-track tape cleaning kit. Remember those? Little boxes filled with tiny brushes, maybe a questionable sponge, and some kind of miracle spray solution. They promised to keep your tapes sounding crisp and prevent them from getting eaten by the notoriously finicky players. A noble goal. The only trouble? These kits were often more trouble than they were worth. The truth was, the brushes could be too abrasive, the chemical sprays might leave weird gunk behind, and sometimes you'd just end up damaging the delicate tape surface instead of helping it. Instead of extending life, they could actually shorten it. It didn't take long for folks to catch on that these weren't miracle cures. People mostly gave up on them, and soon enough, those smaller, more reliable cassette tapes started arriving, pushing 8 tracks and their dubious cleaning kits right out the door. Did we forget any of your favorite things from the 1970s that are now obsolete? Please share your memories in the comments below. And if you had fun taking this trip down memory lane with us, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and maybe share it with a friend who remembers the good old days. Thanks so much for watching.